Bonjour, je vais commencer à parler, dire quelques mots par rapport à cette session numéro 2 de la matinée. Donc tout d'abord, je vais me présenter. Je suis Michel-Ange Amorim, professeur des universités à l'université Paris-Saclay, à la faculté des sciences du sport. Donc je suis professeur en STAPS. Donc les STAPS, c'est les sciences et techniques des activités physiques et sportives. Et les STAPS, cette année, sont à l'honneur avec les JOP 2024 et sont aussi à l'honneur, grâce à cette journée, dans le cadre donc, de ce colloque, le mouvement humain des origines aux olympiades. Donc les STAPS, pour les personnes qui ne connaîtraient pas, c'est une discipline pluridisciplinaire. Et en quelque sorte, ce colloque, il dénote, par rapport à ce qui se fait habituellement, de par cette pluridisciplinarité. Déjà hier, avec les paléoanthropologues, on a parlé de biomécanique, on a parlé de physiologie, on a parlé de biologie, on a parlé de culture aussi, un petit peu, de mouvement, beaucoup, c'est le propos du colloque. Et donc tout ça fait appel à différentes disciplines qui ont un regard commun sur quelque chose qui est le mouvement, l'être humain au mouvement, le mouvement habituel jusqu'au mouvement dans des contraintes plus fortes pour la survie, d'une part, c'était ce qu'on avait vu hier, mais aussi pour la performance sportive en général. Dans les STAPS, c'est pareil, c'est aussi une discipline donc pluridisciplinaire. Il y a de la biomécanique, il y a de la physiologie, il y a de la psychologie, il y a de la sociologie, il y a de l'histoire. Et cette pluridisciplinarité, quelque part, c'est une richesse, mais c'est aussi un challenge. Il faut faire parler les gens entre eux. Les mathématiques, ça peut être un moyen d'arriver à faire parler les gens ensemble, de modéliser, de mettre le vivant et l'être humain sous forme d'équation pour essayer de mieux le comprendre, de mieux comprendre d'où on vient, où on va. Et donc ce colloque, je veux lui donner, parce que je suis en train de vous raconter un contexte beaucoup plus vaste, parce qu'il va nous amener à, comme ça était déjà le cas, à se poser des questions de d'où on vient, où on va, qu'est-ce qu'on fait ici, et les questions même fondamentales comme la conscience. On a parlé de conscience aujourd'hui, ça a été un petit peu évoqué peut-être en filigrane hier, et donc ça nous amène à poser des questions fondamentales. Et c'est grâce notamment à l'initiative donc, de Jean-Jacques Hublin et d'Alain Berthoz, qu'on va pouvoir ici, tous ensemble, partager des connaissances dans un espace de liberté qui est le Collège de France, dans une période où la liberté pose éventuellement quelques questions, ou nous interroge et nous fait discuter. Donc c'est un peu dans ce sanctuaire que j'ai le grand plaisir donc, d'inviter Alain Berthoz à parler. Mais avant, je vais quand même dire quelques mots sur Alain Berthoz. Parce que ça vaut le coup aussi de parler de la personne des chercheurs, puisque les chercheurs sont des individus et qui s'interrogent, qui ont des problématiques existentielles, certainement, comme nous tous. Et donc le parcours d'Alain Berthoz est assez exemplaire. C'est quelqu'un... Il s'interroge, là, je vois français des sorciers. Il m'a dit on avait un petit peu de temps, donc j'en profite. Donc quelqu'un qui a une formation initialement d'ingénieur, si j'ai bien suivi. Alors, on s'est rencontrés quand j'ai voulu faire une thèse. Je sortais d'un DEA en psychologie cognitive, donc à rue Serpente, pas très loin, donc en 91. Et donc je m'intéressais au corps dans l'espace et à l'espace du corps. C'était exactement le laboratoire qu'il me fallait pour étudier ces choses-là. Donc le laboratoire de physiologie neurosensorielle, ça s'appelait à l'époque, situé au couvent des Cordeliers, pas très loin, rue École de médecine. Alain Berthoz était directeur du laboratoire, directeur de recherche au CNRS. Et en 93, on a migré au Collège de France, de par sa nomination au Collège de France. Donc à 54 ans, il faisait une nouvelle carrière de DR CNRS. Il passait professeur au Collège de France, où il allait donc donner des leçons. Et donc je vous suggère vivement d'aller sur YouTube écouter sa leçon inaugurale du 26 mars 1993, qui va vous plonger dans les problématiques donc de conscience, de corps dans l'espace, de mouvement du corps, qu'on retrouve encore jusqu'à aujourd'hui dans ce colloque. À l'époque, donc, je venais donc de psychologie. Alain Berthoz m'avait dit « Vous êtes un pur esprit ». Oui, je sais, le temps passe. Vous êtes un pur esprit, et en fait, quand j'ai fini ma thèse, Alain Berthoz était mon directeur de thèse, je suis reparti avec un cerveau et un corps, donc je vous remercie. Je suis ressorti entier. Donc j'étais son 7e thésard, j'ai fait une recherche sur Internet, au moins 44 thésards ont été encadrés par Alain Berthoz, commencé par Pierre Denise, Thierry Pozzo, qu'on va écouter plus tard. Ensuite, c'est Claudie Ignoré, notre spationaute française, encadrée par Alain Berthoz. Moi, j'étais numéro 7 dans la liste des 44 ou plus thésards. Donc, Alain Berthoz, et ici, nous tous ensemble, je pense qu'on partage ces questions, s'intéresse au corps en mouvement, à la conscience. Je pense à quelque chose qui on pourrait dire, bon, au départ, neurophysiologie du mouvement. Bon, mais ça va au-delà de ça. Il s'intéresse à l'empathie, aux relations interpersonnelles, et en fait à quelque chose qui est très à la mode en ce moment, qui s'appelle la cognition incarnée. En fait, je me suis dit, mais tiens, mais il y a quelque chose qui lui ressemble, qui est quelque chose qui maintenant commence à émerger, qui est cette cognition incarnée, le lien entre le corps et l'esprit, justement, et se dire que un esprit sans corps, finalement, ça ne marche pas. Et le lien avec les olympiades, c'est quoi? C'est on se déplace dans l'espace et on va aller explorer les limites, en quelque part, avec la performance de très haut niveau, les limites individuelles, mais les limites aussi interindividuelles dans les sports collectifs. Et en fait, ça interroge des aspects fondamentaux sur ce qu'est l'être humain. Et donc cette session va aborder des éléments qui sont liés à l'espace. On en a commencé à en parler un petit peu tout à l'heure ce matin, qui serait peut-être un sens minimal, notre sens de l'espace en quelque sorte, qui renvoie à un élément fondamental de la conscience. Je m'oriente, donc je suis, pour être une définition. Et donc je vais commencer par céder la parole à Alain Berthoz, professeur émérite au Collège de France.
Bien. Bonjour. Merci d'être là. Merci à Jean-Jacques et aux orateurs. Mon titre, c'est Le cerveau de Sapiens, c'est l'espace de la locomotion et la marche à la navigation. I am going to do like my colleagues, for respect to our American and foreign colleagues, I will speak in English, and my slides are in French. La marche, la course, it's a complex problem. As you've heard since yesterday, the organization is multi-level, and Francesco Laquaniti, with a very beautiful talk this morning, has summarized this hierarchy. Rhythm generators in the spinal cord, initiation in the mesencephalic reticular formation, repertoires of walking in basal ganglia, integration with posture and emotion. Nous allons parler très peu de l'émotion, malheureusement, dans ce colloque. Il faudrait en faire un complètement. Navigation in hippocampus, which was alluded to by Guy Ferron. Decision, because when we walk, we go somewhere and we make decisions. And I believe that one of the reasons for which physical exercise that Daniel Leberman so beautifully promoted yesterday is also due to the fact that when we walk or when we work, we do a lot of decision-making, which involves all the brain. Integration with the context and styles, which I think Thierry Pozzo will speak about. Now, in front of this complexity, evolution has given to us many mechanisms which allow us to orient, evolve, navigate, share with other people experiences. To me, these mechanisms are simplifying mechanisms, sometimes more complex, or apparently more complex, and I have called them simplex, which it's a word that I did not invent. and that's what I summarize in these two books, Simplexity. What we discover, we, not me, but in neuroscience, biomechanics, physiology, and you have heard about that already in the last day and a half, there are many of these principles which allow us to go fast, efficiently, and elegantly. Rigidity, hypothesis of symmetry, internal models, synergies, listings laws, simplifying 3D eye movements, the two-third power law, one-third power law I will speak about a little bit, minimum jerk, antiphase, etc., etc. So what neuroscience and movement science discovers is that it's incredibly rich repertoire of solutions found during evolution to allow us to survive, which is a problem not of a 20 or 30 minutes of a talk, but which is a problem of 50 milliseconds. Otherwise, we just disappear. And I have a little picture of Nikolai Bernstein on the right here, which was alluded to already by Francesco, who made this book, which all of us should read, Coordination of Movement. Now, I give you just one or two or three examples of these principles. One is the stabilization of the head. What I think Marais did not see. You've seen this beautiful exhibit here on Marais' work, Demeny, Dersonval. Marais described movements, but he was never interested by the head. Never. And what happens is that I took pictures from Muybridge, the photographer, and just made this most simple experiment by putting together superimposing translucent pictures. And I build these pictures here, which show you that when a man is going up a stairs or running, the head is stabilized in rotation, not vertically, but in rotation. Very strange invariance. And this we studied with Thierry Pozzo, that you are going to hear during his thesis, his 3-4 years of stay in our lab. And the idea is that this stabilization is created by the vestibular system, which is an inertial guidance system, similar to what is created in space, dans les choses qu'on fait voler, which is measuring head acceleration, etc. I will come back to that in a moment. So this is very interesting. And you can see this stabilization even in sports, in complex movements like the salto. This was done actually in INSEP, Benjamin, but with Jacques Drolez many years ago. During the salto, during the elevation, you can see here that the head is stabilized in rotation. Then suddenly there is this big turn at 500 degrees per second. And then during the fall, where you have to prepare your landing so that you don't break your legs, again, we have a remarkable global stabilization of the head. So it means that during complex movements, the brain continuously shifts from one mode to another. And this is incredible dynamic shifting of movement modes and use of this inertial guidance system is one of the success, probably, story for high performance. Now let's speak a little bit about the vestibular system. Romain David yesterday gave us a beautiful talk about this. Let me remind you that if I ask you to draw a cat, you will probably draw something like a head and then the body. Well, no. This is a cat. Look at the organization of the vertebral column of the cat. All this in the cat, in the goose, in many animals, the organization of the vertebral column has been designed so that there is a preferred plane, which is a plane of the horizontal semicircumference, which basically is the acanthomatic plane, which is perpendicular to gravity. Evolution has created a preferred horizontal system, and I have no time to talk to you about the organization of the oculomotor system and the visual system. So all these systems are organized with at least one. They are 3D, of course, but they have at least one privileged plane. And if you look at a bird, he goes like this, very quickly. This is a monkey. And in man, of course, we have something remaining a little bit of that. So there is a privileged plane, and there is not only the canals, which Romain described yesterday, but also the otoliths, which are also inertial sensors, which allow us to measure the component of gravity, which has already been said several times. But what I like to show you, in complement to what Romain showed yesterday, is a very strange fact. This is the anatomy of the utriculus of the otoliths and of the sacculus. How strange! And the dynamic part of these sensors which sense acceleration, not linear, but acceleration, the dynamic part is the striola, which is a very strange curve here. How come this is so complex? Because MEMS in industry are very, very straight, very plain. The story is not only that, as Romain described to you yesterday, there has been an evolution of the semicircular canals, and yesterday I discussed with him the fact that in the alligator, the so-called semicircular canals are triangular, and he gave us an explanation for that. But in addition to that, there has also been an evolution of the otolith system. And with Daniel Benquin, we were interested by this strange anatomy of the utriculus and the sacculus and the distribution of these sensory ciliae, dynamic ones, on this complex curve. And the story we made, also I want to show you that because, as I mentioned yesterday, this shape of the otoliths is very dependent on the species. I cannot have time to show you that, but it's very, very different, very varied according to the species. The stories we made, and I would never be able to explain to you the mathematics. You have to ask questions to Daniel Benquin, of course. The story we made, or he made, is that basically evolution is absolutely economic in his solution. What if you remember a tennis ball? A tennis ball has a line, la couture de la balle de tennis, which is 3D. And in one word, the theory of Daniel that we elaborated with a group in Italy, and Benoît Girard, who is engineer at ISIR here in Paris, is that basically the real sensor is not the division between the two. These two maculae are the projection on two planes of a real virtual sensor, which is a 3D sensor which measures directly the acceleration vector in 3D. So it is not, the triculus are not measuring vertical and horizontal. It's an integrated sensor. And evolution has been so economic that it has found a trick, which I call simplex. It looks apparently more complex, to divide this sensor in these two and give that shapes, which is adapted to each species. Absolument extraordinaire. Now, another thing, in addition to the existence of this stabilized head, which allows us, if you look at surfing, if you look at athletes, in the next 2 months, you will see all these athletes performing all this. Look at their head. You will see, even for ski, many years ago, I told my one of my two daughters that I had tried to learn le ski sur bosse. You know, you have to live. I said to her, I tried, it's very complex. I have to go like this all the time. And she said, you are stupid, which is normal for a daughter to speak to her father. And she said, pas du tout. You just have to lift your legs. Une révolution galiléenne, which occurs at basically 3 or 4 years of age, because the child starts by walking like robots with the ground as a reference. This stabilization allows us to free ourselves from the ground and become birds and do surfing, etc. Bon, ça c'est fini pour cette histoire. Now, this stabilization is controlled by gaze. Now, gaze is the direction of the optic axis in space. C'est pas la vision. It's anchoring, which I produce if I start running here. And we have shown in our lab that gaze is not only used by the vestibular system to anchor this plane in space, comme une encre en quelque sorte, providing some of what Daniel provided, des paramètres nécessaires, but also it anticipates the trajectory. If I start turning around here, the idea is that there is also first the eye, then the head, then the body. We go where we look. We do not look where we are going. In this experiment, we measured eye movements during locomotion. This is seen from above, the trajectory of a subject having a complex going on a complex route. Each of these green line is the direction of gaze here. That would be this line. And each of the red dots is the projection of on the ground of the gaze as this little green dot is doing. And you see that when the subject turns, the gaze anticipates. This is very important also for pathology, because many of the pathologies of locomotion are due to pathologies of the ability to anticipate gaze. But that's another topic. Now, we also have shown that anticipation by gaze is found in the dark, which means that trajectory is simulated mentally. And now we are in geometry, which was what Daniel was talking about. This suggests that somehow generating a trajectory in space is first produced in these geometries, which are dependent on the size of space, as Daniel mentioned. And then this is, in a hierarchical way, implemented in the different sensory motor systems. This is interesting because this anticipation by gaze appears during childhood. And I was lucky enough that Christine Assaillante accepted to work with us, and in experiment I think we did in INSEP, in fact, or in INSEP here, we showed together that the child under 3.5 years, the head is, the eye is last, and I think that the error is instead of head you should write eye. Okay, the eye anticipates the head, so the head is after 5 years about. So this was seen by one of my many masters, which I want to pay credit today to Jacques Paillard. Jacques Paillard in Marseille, that I went to visit at the time of the 1968 movement, actually, already was the first to propose the idea that there was a pivotal role of the head, what he called a référentiel staturel géotropique, and in reference frame superordinate that could be the reference frame from which would be integrated all the variety of reference frames in which movements are coded. Very interesting. And we know that the vestibular cortex, I have no time to speak about it now, in the temporal lobe, the vestibular cortex, which receives the information from the vestibular system, is also probably the location where we have what is called the body scheme, un deuxième nous-mêmes, un schéma corporel. And the vestibular system is therefore not only for controlling eye and posture, but also the fundamental reference frame, even as we have shown recently with Ognan Kolev from Bulgaria, the foundation of self, du soi, et de ce modèle interne que nous avons du corps et qui a aussi été décrit par Laconiti dans des travaux sur la gravité. We also have studied that in patients and with tubular vision. But to walk is not only to walk, it's to generate trajectories, like you've done and we do all day long. Now, there are principles also for these generations of trajectories. You've heard this morning a discussion about, about the two-thirds power law. It was shown by Laconiti, Viviani, Terziolo, by Flash et al., that there is a relation between tangential velocity and curvature. En gros, on va vite quand on fait un mouvement et on ralentit au tournant. What we know also, it is true for perception. If I do this movement, which is not at constant velocity, you perceive it at constant velocity if it obeys the two-thirds power law. Il y a similarité entre la perception et les lois du mouvement. We also, together with Tamar Flash and Maoz, showed that for 3D movements, one has to ask to add one component. When we say we showed, it means that actually they showed, of course, that. So there is this principle, and I think, and Tamar Flash, who unfortunately we could not be here today, she is from Israel, she is from Weizmann Institute. We had invited her, but because of the situation there, she could not come and be with us, and it is a miss. But she performed fMRI studies, which I have no time to summarize, to look at what are the brain areas which are involved in performing these simplifying laws. And she also actually looked not only at the fMRI activity, but also at the oscillations which were documented by Guy Chéron very much. So I wanted to mention this work from Tamar Flash, which is so important. Now, what we showed, which was mentioned earlier, is that the two-thirds power law is also true for locomotion. This was an experiment that we did many years ago with Stéphane Biebdan, Yves Kerlerzin in Paris, in our lab, having people walk around. So what does this suggest? This really suggests, as was documented by Daniel, that there are some of these particular geometries which are true for all natural movements. And of course, one can derive many consequences from that in terms of pathology, in terms of training, etc., which is our topic today. There is more. Some years ago, I had the chance to work with Jean-Paul Lomont, who was one of the main roboticians in France. Unfortunately, Jean-Paul died suddenly, very recently. He was young. And together with him, we designed experiments in which we had a subject start from somewhere, and they had to go through a door with a different orientation. So the subject had to depart, then to go through the door and create a trajectory. This they could do this way. They could do this way. They could do this way. Everybody did that. So once more, and this is, I'm sorry because all the references disappeared, but not only that was published in many papers with Jean-Paul, but also in our lab in the Collège here. with Ali Mischer, we published several papers on what we call the stereotypy of locomotor trajectory. And this is extremely interesting because if you look at the paths from the aborigines in Australia and many paths like this in free, you see this simplified and strange shape. So this suggests once more that there are general principles of, one can call it optimization, or we call it geometries, which should serve the generation of movements, whether it is with the finger, with the hand, or during locomotion in different spaces. And this is what I mentioned, that's what the kind of thing we are working together with a group of Anne-Hélène and Julien and Armel Crétual. So this is, and all of these, and I just mentioned it en passant, we have had the chance to work with the robotics community in Japan and in France, and we've shown, for instance, with Vincent Eward, who also unfortunately died recently, that head stabilization is a benefit for control of balance and locomotion in humanoids, and most of the inertial sensors in humanoids had been put for 20 years by roboticians in the trunk because the control was a zero moment point. And now they have understood that like in evolution, in the dinosaurs, in all animals, the inertial system is at the end of the kinematic chain. Okay, so also with Jean-Paul Lomont and Mehdi Benaleg, we worked on robots. You know, there is a community of robots which have made headless robots, des robots sans tête. And they said these robots sans tête peuvent marcher très bien. Now, what happens if you take a robot sans tête without heads, and instead of a flat ground, you put him on a slanted ground, it falls in three steps. And the model developed with Mehdi and Jean-Paul show that if you have such a system here, the robot will fall in 1 million steps. So this is a secret of walking on uneven ground, comme quand vous êtes là au collège sur les pavés, quelque chose comme ça. So there has been collaboration with roboticians on these problems, and we also had with Rennes and with virtual reality combination, and this is an area which is extremely interested with big European project. It's a source of multidisciplinarity, which Michel-Ange mentioned. The last topic of my talk, it will be even one step more in the complexity, because to walk is not only to create a locomotor pattern, it's not only to generate a simple trajectory, but it is also to navigate, like you will do in Paris when you go out from here. Now, we know from recent work of brain imaging that the brain has different systems, not only for different size of space, pas seulement pour l'espace du corps, l'espace de préhension, l'espace locomoteur ou l'espace environnemental. But we know that if we have to imagine our path in space, like if you imagine the path from the college, from the entrance of the college to here, you can do it by imagining your own movements, sequential, egocentric, I call it topokinesthetic, or you can imagine a survey, allocentric topographic strategy. So we also have different systems, as we now know from brain imaging, for these different cognitive strategies of generating a locomotor navigation strategy. Also, we can also take other people as reference, which is another question. And I just show you one experiment among many that we have done and that has been done in the literature. This was done with Laure Rondireg, who is at the head of a team. She worked in our lab for several years, but she came from Boston, where she worked with the Nobel Prize, who created with mice a model of cerebellum. And we worked at designing a task which was derived from our original paradigm, which was a labyrinth in which she had tested on the mouse, a navigation labyrinth, to show the importance of the cerebellum in navigation, etc., on knockout mouse. So the subject departed from one place in a virtual environment. C'est pas la vraie locomotion, c'est la navigation. Mais l'idée, c'est que ce sera aussi valable dans des tâches réelles. Subject departed, had to go somewhere, and he had to find in the labyrinth the code. So he could go randomly, or he could have a strategy, and when he arrived here, he would say, bravo, and the subject could have some chocolate or something, a reward. So it was the generation of a trajectory to find an unknown goal. Now, we showed with Laure, and this was fMRI studies which was done in the lab of Neil Burgess, which was mentioned previously by Guy Chéron, who produced this model of the cells, the grid cells. We showed here that the cerebellum was involved in these cognitive strategies, either these two egocentric strategy or the allocentric strategy, but it was a special part of the cerebellum. It was not the vermis, which we all know, or don't know, but you will hear about it now, is involved in sensory motor coordination, but the lateral part, le néocérébelleux, cervelet, qui est apparu plus tard dans l'évolution, and which is involved in long loops related to more cognitive functions. So this involvement of the cerebellum in these cognitive strategies for generating locomotor trajectories is a neocerebellum involved in these long loops, not only the classical basal ganglia thalamocortical loops. And the two strategies, et les deux stratégies, égocentriques et allocentriques, n'activent pas le même cervelet à gauche et à droite. Il y a une latéralisation, there is a lateralization of the function of the cerebellum. We have also shown that it is true for the hippocampus. We also know it is true for the brain itself, because we have a left brain and a right brain. So there is a lateralization in the organization of these locomotor trajectories when we want to make it more complex. Et c'est la dernière des diapos. We also are using these results in many paradigms for pathology, in PISA, showing that children who have apparently locomotor deficits have in fact also difficulty to switch from one strategy to another or one space to another. We have also new paradigms inspired by our friends in Italy, where we have designs of locomotor tasks to go to different kinds of strategies, targets for visual motor spatial memory. And with Mohamed Zawi, who is sitting over there, here, we have created what we call a tapis virtuel, which allows us to combine measurements of movement together with in many kinds of tasks on the ground. And we work on that on vestibular patients, and also in Salpêtrière, Hôpital Salpêtrière, we work on designing paradigms where a subject has to go to a house many times, learns a given trajectory, and then suddenly we block and he has to relearn. So we can study also the flexibility of the brain to produce all these movements. Merci beaucoup.